Hi, everybody. Welcome to English Digest. I'm Stephanie.
I'm Tom.
Gojan Esperanto Tagen.
Sounds very convincing to me. What did you just say? I don't understand.
Happy Esperanto Day. Now, Esperanto, isn't that hope in Spanish? No?
That's esperanza, but Esperanto sounds similar to that.
Very similar.
Yeah, it sounds like hope there, but in any case here, this is a language that was kind of made up at one time. And I remember when I was back in college, I thought, well, you know, they're always debating what language people should speak, and it doesn't seem fair to people who speak less common languages that they're forced to speak, like French or English
or Spanish
or Russian or Chinese or something. Isn't there a language that everybody has to learn as a second language? So, yeah, like Americans, we don't have to learn a second language because everybody learns English, so we get off the hook there. Maybe everybody could study Esperanto, and that's what we're going to talk about, but this is a totally artificial language, and nobody really speaks this as their mother tongue.
Yeah, not many people speak it today. It was actually created quite a while ago, and it's the birthday or anniversary of this language. So that's why we're going to be talking about it. Now, Tom had heard about this language in the past. I had not, but it's very interesting. They went to a guy who was an expert at languages, and he kind of combined elements from 12 different languages. Well, we'll talk about how this took place. Guys, as you can see, this is our all English lecture, which means we are not allowed to say anything in Chinese, and there is no Chinese teacher. So we'll try to go a little bit slower. Tom, if you start speeding up, I'll say
slow down indeed. So you can't tell me to slow down in Chinese or any other language. But it's going to be kind of difficult to have an all-English lecture if we're talking about another foreign language here. But we'll do the best we can here. But let's talk about making waves and making connections. The story of Esperanto. So let's get to it, everybody. Let's read the entire contents of our lesson now one time. Gojan Esperanto Tagon. Happy Esperanto Day. July 26th commemorates the 133rd birthday of this remarkable constructed language, which has survived decades of oppression and fostered a community of over 2 million speakers. Esperanto was born out of necessity. It was created by Ludwig Zamenhof, a Jewish doctor living in Białystok, modern-day Poland. Then part of the diverse Russian Empire, Białystok was populated by numerous ethnic groups who lacked a common language. This barrier contributed to mistrust between the different groups, often leading to outbreaks of violence. A passionate linguist, Zamenhof suggested that Białystok should have a neutral intercultural language to ease tensions in the city. Using his incredible knowledge of 12 languages, he developed an artificial language that could be learned with just 10 minutes of study a day. He published a comprehensive manual of the language, the Unua Libro, in 1887 under the pseudonym Dr. Esperanto. Though Zamenhof's work spread internationally, Esperanto was regarded with suspicion by the European elite. Attempts to have it adopted as a working language of the League of Nations were vetoed by France, who didn't want it to displace French, which was the global language of diplomacy at the time. Esperanto was banned in several territories and was especially targeted by anti-Semitic governments due to Zamenhof's background. Both Nazi Germany and the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, USSR, ruled that anyone caught speaking the language would be executed. Though the suppression of Esperanto continued into the 1980s, it survived thanks to its simplicity. With only 16 grammar rules and a basic vocabulary of only 500 words, learners can understand the fundamentals in a matter of hours. This is one reason why, in international communication, it's also considered an easier alternative to English for non-native speakers. Perhaps it's time the world gave Esperanto the consideration it deserves.
Okay, guys, let's look at the title first. Making waves. When you make waves, you usually disturb something that's going on. Don't make waves. Sometimes my mom would say this to my brother, who sometimes would cause trouble at parties. Don't make waves. So just accept stuff, go along with whatever's happening. Making connections is just, getting to know people. And usually making connections is one of the most important things you do once you graduate from school and start out on your new career. Making connections is really important, especially if you want to get ahead in your career or do well in your career. So this particular language, Esperanto, it's a little bit of both things. Kind of made some waves with people. It kind of got some people upset about it. We'll talk about that. But it also was a great way to help people make connections who didn't speak English or French. So the story of Esperanto, how we came to have this particular language, which is completely made up by one man. But it sounds pretty simple if you look at the details.
Yeah. It might be simple for Westerners because it was invented in Europe there.
Yeah.
It may be more difficult for people from, say, Africa or Asia, etc., etc. But, you can investigate this and find out if it's something you'd like to look into. But, yeah, we're making connections and we're making waves, the story of Esperanto. Now, we've got a phrase here, Gojan Esperanto Tagon. I hope we said that right. It might be Gojan or Goyan, according to some rules of pronunciation in Europe there. But in any case, this particular phrase means Happy Esperanto Day. And July 26th, which is coming up in a couple of weeks here, commemorates the 133rd birthday of this remarkable constructed language, which has survived decades of oppression and fostered a community of over 2 million speakers. Yeah, I've heard that. There are people out there who do try to learn this language, and they have clubs, and they get together, and they talk in this language. There are probably websites, and they probably talk on ham radio or whatever, and they keep this language alive. So we should go back here and talk about the word commemorate here. That's a verb that just means you recognize and celebrate something, especially if you recognize something that happened in the past, like, say, July 4th in the United States commemorates the Declaration of Independence, which happened in 1776.
Yeah, this remarkable constructed language survived decades of oppression and fostered a community of over 2 million speakers. Oppression. Oppression is a bad thing. It's usually when there's been a period of really cruel and unjust treatment, usually from a government over a particular group of people. Oppressed. I feel so oppressed. Sometimes we use it as a joke. We really shouldn't, I guess. But if you're oppressed, you feel like you don't have the freedom to do what you want. I know a lot of the kids, I should say students in Hong Kong have been demonstrating. They feel oppressed. They feel like they're having to deal with a lot of oppression from the police right now and the government, not letting them have the freedoms they really want. So, yeah, they actually came up with this language to help people communicate better, but it wasn't received very well. So it's survived after decades of oppression, and it says fostered a community of over 2 million speakers. So because of this language really helping a group of people, there are still 2 million people around this world that can speak this language. To foster just kind of means to cultivate, right? To cultivate, to promote the development of something, to promote the growth of something, to foster.
Now let's look at the next paragraph here. It says, Esperanto was born out of necessity. So yeah, born out of necessity. That means it came into existence because it was needed. Okay, it's not because somebody was trying to write a dissertation for their degree or something like that, and they decided to make up a language. No, they actually did this because it was necessary for people to communicate. Let's talk a little bit about the background here. It was created by a person named Ludwig Zamenhof, and he was a Jewish doctor living in Białystok, which is in modern-day Poland. And I believe I did not say that correctly. I'm not Polish. I'm not Russian, so I'm not going to apologize for that. But I think you looked it up there. It's Białystok or
Białystok.
Something like that.
Białystok.
In a Russian accent.
Yeah.
I'm sure Mila Kunis would know how to pronounce this. But in any case here, yes, that's a town in Poland. And then part of the diverse Russian Empire, Białystok was populated by numerous ethnic groups who lacked a common language. So, yes, we've got the Russian Empire, and they had all sorts of different people living in this town, and they just couldn't talk to each other. They had all these numerous ethnic groups, and they did not really have a common language. Ethnic just refers to different kinds of people who have different customs and different traditions and different food, and most importantly, they have different languages. So in this particular city, they were speaking different languages, and they just couldn't communicate with each other, so they needed some kind of common language.
Here it says that it was part of the diverse Russian Empire. Białystok was populated by numerous ethnic groups. So to be populated by, and then after the by, you'd have what kind of group it was. So we could say Taiwan is populated by Han Chinese. There are different ethnic groups here. There are even some foreigners like me and like Tom. So populated by, and then whatever group it is. Ethnic just means a group that is, has their own culture, sometimes has their own language. We have different ethnic groups here in Taiwan. So it's a population subgroup. So it's not the majority of the people typically. It's usually the minority, or there are different minority groups who live within a larger population. And like I said, they have a culture. And sometimes they have their own language as well. For example, the Hakka, they have their own language and they have their own culture as well. So it was populated by a lot of different ethnic groups who lacked a common language. And you've got to communicate in order to just get along, right? I mean, we can do a lot of sign language with our hands. We've all done that before. But at some point, you want to be able to communicate at a deeper level. And we had this gentleman we're going to be talking about that had an idea how to fix this.
Yes, indeed. So how were they going to fix this barrier here? Well, again, we've got this barrier, this obstacle between these people. So that contributed to mistrust between the different groups, often leading to outbreaks of violence. So yeah, they could not communicate with each other. So therefore, they did not trust each other. And that's what mistrust is. When you don't trust somebody because of mistrust, I am no longer friends with Dave, for example. He betrayed my trust, so I don't trust him anymore. And that's just an example here. But in any case here, it contributed or brought about this mistrust. And so they would often have fights and stuff like that, screaming at each other in languages that they didn't understand. Okay, moving on now to the next paragraph. It says, a passionate linguist, Zamenhof suggested that Białystok should have a neutral intercultural language to ease tensions in the city. So this particular person was a linguist. He was a passionate linguist, which means he really liked linguistics, which is the study of languages. So he probably knew quite a few of them. And he thought instead of forcing everybody to learn Russian or something like that, they should have a neutral language or a neutral intercultural language to ease those tensions in the city. So if something's neutral, that means they don't take sides. Like Switzerland is always neutral in wars in Europe there. They were not on the side of the Nazis, nor were they on the side of the Allies during World War II. They were neutral. So yeah, they needed a language that could satisfy everybody. They needed an intercultural language that everybody could learn and everybody could understand, and that basically was something they could all agree on.
It's true. We are going to continue talking about this, but it's probably a good time to take a break. We are going to take a short break. There's no Chinese teacher, so relax, and we'll be right back. Welcome back, guys. We're talking about the story of Esperanto, a language that was created by a gentleman to help the different ethnic groups where he lived communicate better and have better relationships. So he was a passionate linguist. Zamenhof thought that they needed a neutral intercultural language to ease tensions in the city, help people get along a lot better. Intercultural just means lots of different cultures working together, and this is an intercultural language. So using his incredible knowledge of 12 languages, I can't imagine someone actually speaking 12 languages. He developed an artificial language that could be learned with just 10 minutes of study a day. So this particular language, Esperanto, it's not very hard. It's quite simple. I'm sure you couldn't have a really in-depth conversation about any topic you wanted, but it was enough to communicate for these people. He wanted to keep it simple. He published a comprehensive manual of the language called the Un Libro in 1887 under the pseudonym Dr. Esperanto. That's cute. Your pseudonym is just a name that you make up, that you go by if you're an author. Maybe you don't want your friends and family to know that you're writing spy novels or romance novels, so you come up with a name, and that's your pseudonym.
Now, here in the next paragraph it says, though Zamenhof's work spread internationally, Esperanto was regarded with suspicion by the European elite. So it spread to other countries, but still, even though this is true, it was regarded with suspicion by the European elite. And elite here just refers to people who are kind of the best in a society. They're the smartest, they're the intellectuals and stuff like that.
The richest.
Exactly. So they thought, no, we're not going to use that Esperanto. We want to use our high-class language, which was probably French. Attempts to have it adopted as a working language of the League of Nations were vetoed by France, who didn't want it to displace French, which was the global language of diplomacy at the time. So remember, the League of Nations was formed after World War I, and it dissolved later on and then became the United Nations after World War II. But at the time, if you were a diplomat or an ambassador and you wanted to talk to each other, you spoke in French. So the French did not want French displaced. Here, displaced means something just kind of gets removed or kicked out, and then it gets replaced by something else. And French was the language of diplomacy at the time. And diplomacy, of course, has to do with diplomats and ambassadors and people like that.
I wanted to mention, if you veto something, you reject a proposal or decision. Usually it's some sort of law. So they vetoed it. They didn't want this. Esperanto was banned in several territories and was especially targeted by anti-Semitic governments due to Zamenhof's background. Zamenhof was Jewish. I think we mentioned that at the beginning. If you're anti-Semitic or anti-Semitic, they're both correct pronunciations. It means you are prejudiced against Jews. So you have a problem with Jews. And unfortunately, we still have this prejudice that's still out there. It's kind of sad. So anti-Semitic, you have a real hard time with anything that has to do with Jews or the Jewish culture or the people. And there were governments out there that were absolutely anti-Semitic. We know that World War II, when it took place, Hitler was trying to kill as many Jews around the world as he could. So yeah, it was targeted because of Zamenhof's background, who he was. Both Nazi Germany and the USSR, which is the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, so long, that's why we came up with USSR, they ruled that anyone caught speaking the language would be executed. When we use the word executed, it means you are killed, and it's usually done by probably back then they would just probably shoot you in the head. But it was a horrible thing. So, yeah, it was pretty serious if they caught you trying to speak the language.
And here in the next paragraph it says, though the suppression of Esperanto continued into the 1980s, it survived thanks to its simplicity. So, yes, even though it was suppressed by the Russians and the Nazis and other people, it still continued on into the 1980s, and it survived thanks to its simplicity. So, yeah, there's still people out there who try to learn this language. And with only 16 grammar rules and a basic vocabulary of only 500 words, learners can understand the fundamentals in a matter of hours. Hey, that sounds like my kind of language here. Who likes grammar?
No one.
Grammar rules take forever to learn. You got to memorize stuff and stuff like that. I wanted to study Japanese last year, but my goodness, Japanese grammar is so complicated. So I kind of gave up on it. And English grammar is no better. But this particular language only has 16 rules of grammar, and you only need 500 words to speak it.
Pretty attractive to a lot of people, I'm sure, because no one likes the rules. And you can do it, you can learn it, at least the fundamentals, the basics of the language, in a matter of hours or just a really short amount of time there. There is one reason why, or this is one reason why, in international communication, it's also considered an easier alternative to English, at least for non-native speakers. The problem with English is just the grammar is insane. Also, the pronunciation's a little weird, too. I apologize for English. It's tough. As I tell a lot of my Taiwanese friends, actually, I bet half of Americans can't even write very well in English. Even professors who go on to teach school with PhDs and they write books and stuff, I've been kind of horrified to read some of their writing. It's pretty bad. When you're writing, guys, just remember it's not about using really impressive vocabulary. It's about being clear. You want people to understand your meaning. That's the most important thing. I'm going to tell a story here. I do dubbing on videos sometimes, and the professor who probably teaches English in a college here has written the script. Sometimes it's so bad I can't understand the English, and I have to get the Chinese to figure out what he was trying to say. It's not about showing off or using phrases or verbs that nobody else does. It's about communicating. So make sure that whatever you're writing is clear. And then, try to use different words and phrases to make your writing more interesting. But yeah, English is not easy, especially the written English.
It kind of matters or kind of depends on what you're trying to communicate. But we understand that English grammar is difficult.
Yeah.
So if you screw up on the grammar, that's fine as long as you understand what you're saying. I'm sure foreigners who speak Chinese make a mess of it all the time as well. We're really bad at the tones.
I'm terrible.
And that kind of stuff there. So it kind of goes both ways. But in any case here, you can learn it quickly in just a matter of hours.
Wow.
So it's considered an easier alternative to English, a different choice. And perhaps it's time the world gave Esperanto the consideration it deserves. And I'm kind of curious about this particular language because, as we said earlier in the lesson here, it was developed in Poland for the ethnic groups who lived there at the time. And I don't think there were probably a lot of Chinese people or Japanese people or Kenyans living there for that matter. So I'm curious as to how people outside of Europe would be able to learn this language. Would they still consider it difficult, or would they consider it easy with the simplified grammar rules?
I don't know. It would be interesting to talk to them. Polish is difficult to learn.
Oh, I've heard Russian's really hard, too. The grammar's really strange.
Yeah. Well, Russian to me, I had to sing some songs in Russian. It's very like that, like you're eating milk chocolate while you're saying a word. But my nephew speaks Polish. He went there as a missionary. That one's tough, too. And it sounds very, it's closer to German, I would say, than anything I've heard. But I love languages. So I think the more we can learn, the more We'll understand the world around us. And I think we'll have more empathy for people who are from different cultures. I think it's just a great idea. If you're going traveling, why not first learn a couple of phrases? You know, it's kind of fun if you go to the market and you're able to say, oh, how much does this cost? Or, hello, how are you? Those little things, I think it means a lot to people from that particular country you're visiting.
Indeed. But of course, some languages dominate. I understand that if you travel in Southeast Asia here, you can get by with Mandarin Chinese. Of course,
really?
Lots of Chinese people are traveling all over Asia. So, of course, people in different countries are learning Mandarin to handle the travelers. So you should be able to communicate perfectly fine. I've heard of even people in France learning Chinese to accommodate the tourists and stuff like that. So, but the only problem with that is, at least for Westerners, Chinese is quite difficult because of all the tones.
The tones are hard.
But on the other hand, you know, Western grammar for people out here in Asia can be quite bizarre at times too. So, and I don't think a lot of people know Esperanto. So if you go into a store in Zurich and say you want to buy a diamond ring or something in Esperanto, they're going to go, well, that's cute, but we don't speak that language.
Yeah, I was in France a couple years ago, Paris, and one of the ladies at a chocolate store, I just thought she looks, she definitely looks Chinese. But I tried my Mandarin on her and she went, oh, she was from China. But she had moved to Paris and was working there. Anyway, maybe some of you have an interest. Check out Esperanto. Get back to us on whether it's as easy as they say to learn. That's all the time we have, guys. We hope you enjoyed learning about this very rare and kind of remarkable language, and we hope you'll give it a shot. Join us next time for English Digest. I'm Stephanie.
And I'm Tom. Goodbye.
Bye.